The microphone screeched, then steadied. "Give your sister your penthouse as a wedding gift," my father said into it, smiling like he'd just told a sweet story. 200 guests laughed softly. Glasses clinked. Someone whistled. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I didn't move. My sister stared at the floor, already certain of the outcome. My father didn't wait for my answer. He nodded, satisfied, as if ownership could be transferred by applause. Before I tell you how this turned out, if you're listening right now, tap like, or drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. And if this hits close to home, feel free to share it. Have you ever been cornered into giving up something you earned, just to keep the peace? My name is Mia. I'm in my early 30s. For most of my life, I've been the one people underestimated because I stayed quiet. Silence has always been my armor. I learned early that reacting only feeds people who enjoy control. So I stood there, holding my glass, letting the room decide who they thought I was. People read my stillness as weakness. They always do. I didn't argue. I didn't laugh it off. I didn't look for support. I watched. I watched how quickly everyone accepted the idea. How easily something I worked years for became a family solution. How no one asked me if I agreed, only when I'd move out. My father cleared his throat again, warming up to the moment. He spoke about sacrifice. About tradition. About how family comes before personal comfort. Each sentence was rehearsed, delivered with the confidence of someone who believed resistance was impossible in public. The penthouse had never been discussed openly before. It existed in a strange space, acknowledged but not respected. Relatives joked about it. Friends called it temporary. As if it wasn't mine yet. As if it never really would be. I bought it after years of saving quietly. No help. No announcements. Just paperwork, patience, and nights spent working when others slept. But none of that mattered now. Because none of that made good wedding conversation. My sister's engagement had flipped a switch in the family. Suddenly, everything I had was viewed as excess. Everything she wanted was viewed as necessity. I paid for things without being asked. I handled arrangements without being thanked. And when people joked that I was basically the backup parent, I smiled because correcting them felt pointless. So when my father made his announcement, it didn't shock me. What shocked me was how comfortable he looked saying it out loud. How easily he assumed compliance. How sure he was that public pressure would do the rest. He didn't say, "Would you consider?" He said, "Give." A word chosen carefully, spoken confidently, backed by an audience. A word meant to corner, not negotiate. When he finally paused, the room leaned in. He looked at me with a smile that wasn't asking, it was reminding. This was the part where I was supposed to nod. So I did. Once. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. Relief spread instantly. People relaxed. Someone clapped. Then more joined in. My sister let out a breath she'd been holding all evening. They thought the story was over. Dinner was served, and conversation returned like nothing had happened. People congratulated me on my generosity. A cousin leaned over and said, "You don't even need a place that big anyway." Another joked about how lucky my sister was to have me. My father basked in it. He moved from table to table, laughing louder than usual, retelling the moment like a highlight. Every version got bolder. Every retelling erased me a little more. Confidence makes people sloppy. And my father was very confident. He spoke freely. About how the penthouse would help my sister start her new life right. About how my name on the documents was just a formality. About how things like this could be sorted out quickly after the wedding. Phones were out. Videos were being recorded. People were listening. I noticed something else too. A man sitting near the back of the hall, alone, untouched plate in front of him. He wasn't watching the bride. He wasn't watching the groom. He was watching my father. Every time my father spoke, the man tilted his head slightly, like he was cataloging details. When people laughed, he didn't. When applause rose, he didn't join in. I looked away first. The speeches continued. My father's tone grew looser, almost careless. He joked about how I'd land on my feet. How I was good at adapting. How I didn't really need roots. Each line drew more laughter. Each line dug deeper. At some point, someone asked if everything was already signed. My father waved his hand dismissively. "Soon," he said. "These things take care of themselves." That was when I understood what this really was. Not a request. Not even a demand. A public declaration meant to make resistance look ugly. If I said no now, I wouldn't be protecting myself. I'd be ruining a wedding. If I protested later, I'd be greedy. If I stayed silent, I'd be compliant. So I stayed silent. Because silence gave me time. Dessert was being cleared when my father raised his glass again, ready to add one more flourish to the night. He stepped closer to the microphone, smiling, already convinced he'd won. That's when a chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound cut through the room, sharp and wrong. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Applause died instantly. The man from the back stood up. He straightened his jacket calmly, like he'd been waiting for the right second. He didn't look at my sister. He didn't look at the guests. He looked directly at my father. And then he spoke. "Touch her assets again," he said evenly, "and you'll lose yours." The hall fell silent. The silence didn't break right away. It thickened. My father laughed first, short, confused, dismissive. "Excuse me," he said, still holding the mic, still assuming authority protected him. A few guests chuckled nervously, waiting for the punchline that never came. The man didn't repeat himself. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes steady. "You heard me," he said. And so did everyone else. Now people were turning in their chairs. Phones lifted higher. Whispers rippled through the hall like static. My father's smile tightened. "Who are you?" he asked, the tone sharp now. "This is a private family matter." The man nodded once, as if he'd expected that response. "That's interesting," he said calmly. "Because you made it public." A murmur spread. Someone near the stage shifted uncomfortably. The videographer didn't stop recording. My father cleared his throat and tried again. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said, waving his hand. "Sit down. You're interrupting a wedding." "I know exactly what I'm interrupting," the man replied. "And I'm doing it on purpose." That was when I noticed something else. No one was stopping him. Not the event staff. Not my relatives. Not even my father, who usually controlled every room he entered. Overconfidence had made him slow. "You don't get to threaten people here," my father snapped. "Especially my daughter." The man's eyes flicked toward me for the first time. Not with sympathy. Not with pity. With recognition. "I'm not threatening," he said. "I'm warning." My sister finally looked up. Her face had gone pale. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. My father scoffed. "About what? A gift?" He laughed, louder than necessary. "She's family. She knows how these things work." The man tilted his head slightly. "That's exactly why this is a problem." My father stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "Security," he called out, irritated. "Can we get him out of here?" No one moved. The man continued, unfazed. "You announced a transfer of private property," he said, "belonging solely to her, without consent, in front of witnesses." He gestured lightly toward the room. "These people." My father rolled his eyes. "Oh please. Nothing's official yet." "That's true," the man agreed. "And it's the only reason you're still standing there comfortably." A few people gasped. Someone whispered my name. I still hadn't spoken. I could feel the room slowly realizing that this wasn't random. That this interruption had weight. My father's confidence wavered, just slightly. "You think you're clever?" he said. "You think you know something about our family?" "I know enough," the man replied. "And more importantly, so do you." The words landed heavy. My father tried to laugh again, but it didn't come out right this time. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Sit down before you embarrass yourself." The man didn't move. Instead, he reached into his jacket, not dramatically, not rushed. Just enough to make several people inhale sharply. He didn't pull anything out. He let his hand rest there for a moment, then withdrew it slowly. "I won't embarrass myself," he said. "You already did that." The room had shifted completely now. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was tension. My father glanced around, looking for support. He found very little. People were watching him the way they watch someone who might fall. "This conversation is over," my father said firmly. He turned his back slightly, as if that could end it. "That's usually what people say," the man replied, right before it starts. My father froze. You see, the man continued, voice steady, confidence works best when no one challenges it. He looked around again. Tonight, you challenged yourself. My father spun back around. What do you want? He snapped. The man met his eyes. For you to stop. Laughter bubbled up again, thin and uncertain. My father seized it. You hear that? He said to the room. Stop. As if he's in charge. The man nodded slowly. No, he said. I'm not in charge. He paused. But the truth is. That sentence hung there, unfinished. My father took a step forward, anger flaring now. You don't get to lecture me about my family, he said. Especially not over property that will be handled internally. The man finally smiled. Just a little. Internally, he repeated. That's the word you keep using. He glanced at the phones. At this point, I'm not sure that word applies anymore. The room went very quiet again. My father looked at me then. Really looked at me. For the first time that night, uncertainty crept into his expression. I met his eyes and said nothing. That's when he realized something was wrong. Not because of the man. Not because of the guests. Because I still wasn't panicking. He turned back to the man, voice lower now. Who sent you? He asked. No one, the man said. I came because I was invited. That didn't make sense to anyone but me. My father frowned. Invited by who? The man's gaze slid back to me, just for a second. I think, he said carefully, you already know. A ripple of confusion swept the hall. My sister gripped the edge of the table. My father's jaw tightened. You think this is a game? He said quietly. No, the man replied. I think this is the moment before consequences. For the first time all evening, my father didn't know what to say. And that was when he made his biggest mistake. He leaned into the microphone and said, Fine. Let's clear this up. She owes this family far more than a penthouse. The room collectively inhaled. Because now, he wasn't just confident. He was careless. And everyone was listening. My father's words hung in the air longer than he expected them to. She owes this family far more than a penthouse. For a split second, I saw relief on his face, like he thought he'd finally said the thing everyone was thinking. Validation. Agreement. Instead, the room stiffened. Someone near the front shifted in their seat. A woman 2 tables over stopped chewing. The laughter didn't come this time. I felt it then, the turn. Not toward me. Away from him. He mistook the silence for permission and kept going. When you raise someone, he said, voice growing louder, steadier, you invest. Time. Money. Sacrifice. He gestured toward me without looking. And sometimes, it's time that investment comes back to the family. There it was. Not a request. A debt. People were recording openly now. No one tried to hide it anymore. My sister stared straight ahead, her smile frozen, like if she didn't move, the moment might pass her by. It wouldn't. The man at the back didn't interrupt. That should have worried my father more than anything else. Instead, he leaned into it, energized. She lived under my roof, my father continued. She benefited from this family's name, this family's stability. He laughed once. A penthouse is a small return, don't you think? A few uncomfortable chuckles followed. Not agreement, habit. I lowered my glass onto the table, carefully. The clink was soft, but it grounded me. Because something inside me settled right then. This wasn't about the penthouse anymore. This was about control, spoken too openly, in the wrong room. The man finally spoke again. Interesting, he said. So you see support as a loan. My father scoffed. Don't twist my words. I'm not, the man replied. I'm clarifying them. My father waved him off. This is family business. You wouldn't understand. That's where you're wrong, the man said. I understand it very well. He took a step forward, not toward the stage, just into clearer view. People instinctively leaned back to make space. You've been careful for years, the man continued. Careful about what you say privately versus publicly. He glanced around. Tonight, you stopped being careful. My father's face flushed. You're reaching. No, the man said calmly. You're recording yourself. That landed. My father glanced instinctively at the phones, then caught himself. Too late. This is absurd, he snapped. You're acting like any of this means something. The man nodded. It does. Just not yet. That was the moment people decided who they were watching. It wasn't me. It wasn't even the stranger. It was my father. Because suddenly, he looked like someone trying to outrun his own words. He straightened his jacket and forced a smile. Enough, he said. This wedding doesn't need drama. He turned to the guests. Let's all remember why we're here. Applause started again, hesitant, scattered. Someone clapped too early. Someone else joined out of politeness. My father seized it like a lifeline. There, he said, gesturing broadly. See? This is over. He stepped back from the mic, already retreating into the comfort of social momentum. Already rewriting the moment in his head. The man didn't stop him. He didn't follow. He didn't argue. He simply sat back down. And that confused everyone. Whispers spread immediately. So, who was that? Was that planned? Is everything okay? The tension didn't leave. It just went underground. My father avoided the mic after that. He stayed loud, but smaller, circling tables, laughing too hard, checking faces for approval. He didn't look at me again. People approached me quietly. Are you okay? That was intense. You're so strong, handling it like that. I nodded. Smiled. Said very little. Inside, it felt like something had been taken from me. Not the penthouse. Illusion. The illusion that this was ever about fairness. By the time dessert ended, the story had already been decided, for everyone else. They thought the stranger had overstepped. They thought my father had asserted authority. They thought I'd been publicly corrected into place. On the way out, I heard it more than once. Well, families sort these things out. At least it's staying in the family. She'll be fine. She always is. That's how defeat looks to people who don't understand patience. I left early. In the parking lot, my phone vibrated. One message. From a number I didn't have saved. You handled that exactly right. Don't respond yet. Let them finish talking. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked my phone and slid it into my bag. Because the truth was, I felt empty. Not angry. Not panicked. Just hollow. It looked like I'd lost. It felt like I'd been erased in front of everyone who mattered. And that's exactly what made the next part work. Because while they were celebrating a victory they hadn't earned, everything they needed to lose was already in motion. They just didn't know it yet. I didn't go home that night. Not to the penthouse. Not anywhere public. I drove until the city thinned out and parked where I could think without being watched. That hollow feeling stayed with me longer than I expected. Because when you're treated like property long enough, you start questioning your own edges. My phone vibrated again. Another message from the same number. They're going to move fast now. They think silence means surrender. I typed one word. I know. That was the first thing I'd said all night that was completely true. The advantage I had didn't come from money. Or rage. Or some dramatic reveal. It came from paperwork. From patience. From the fact that years ago, I'd learned to protect myself quietly, because no one else ever did. The penthouse wasn't just in my name. It sat inside a layered structure I'd been advised to create when I bought it. A structure meant for asset protection, succession clarity, and legal insulation. At the time, it felt excessive. Now, it felt prophetic. My father didn't know that. No one in my family did. They'd always assumed access meant control. That blood overrode documentation. That confidence could intimidate law into submission. It couldn't. The stranger from the wedding wasn't a stranger at all. He was someone I'd met months earlier, quietly, after a casual comment from a relative had unsettled me. Someone who specialized in untangling exactly this kind of mess, before it became public damage. I hadn't planned the wedding moment. Not like that. But I had prepared for pressure. That mattered. Over the next few days, my phone stayed quiet. Which told me everything. People who believe they've won don't rush. They settle in. Then the calls started. First from an aunt. Gentle. Curious. Your father was a little emotional the other night. You understand. I listened. Said nothing. Then my sister. Soft voice. Practiced concern. We should talk. Just us. I let it go to voicemail. Then my father. No greeting. No warmth. We need to handle the paperwork this week, he said. I've already spoken to someone. I waited 3 seconds before responding. Who? I asked. A pause. Too long. That's not important, he said. Don't complicate this. I almost smiled. Send me everything, I replied. Then I hung up. What followed was predictable. Documents forwarded without signatures. Messages that assumed cooperation. Language that implied urgency without authority. They were acting like people who thought momentum could replace consent. Meanwhile, I met quietly with the man from the wedding. Not in an office. Not over coffee. In a neutral room with a long table and no distractions. He laid everything out plainly. What my father had done publicly. What he'd implied. What had been recorded. What that meant. He created witnesses, he said. He established intent. And most importantly, he paused, he demonstrated a pattern. I nodded. I'd lived that pattern. The plan wasn't revenge. It was exposure through sequence. We didn't confront. We documented. Every call. Every message. Every assumption they put into writing. They thought I was stalling. They thought time was on their side. In reality, they were finishing the case for me. The invitation arrived 2 weeks later. A family meeting. Formal tone. Neutral location. Lawyers present. They thought this was where I'd finally be reasonable. I arrived early. Sat quietly. Said hello politely. My father didn't look at me when he walked in. He didn't need to. He thought he knew the ending. My sister avoided my eyes entirely. When everyone was seated, my father began speaking before anyone else could. He talked about unity. About misunderstanding. About resolving things privately. Then he slid a folder across the table toward me. I didn't open it. Instead, I looked at the man seated beside me. He nodded once. Before we begin, he said calmly, there's something that needs to be clarified. My father frowned. This isn't necessary. It is, the man replied. Because what you're proposing assumes authority you don't have. Silence. Papers were placed on the table. Different folders. Different names. My father's color drained as he read. This structure, the man continued, was designed specifically to prevent coercive transfers. He tapped one page lightly. And your public statements have activated protections you didn't know existed. My father looked up at me for the first time since the wedding. What did you do? He asked. I met his eyes, calm. Nothing, I said. I let you talk. That was when he understood. Not that he'd lost the penthouse. That he'd exposed himself trying to take it. And the worst part, for him, was realizing the real audience hadn't been the wedding guests. It had been the process. The meeting didn't end the way my father expected. There was no raised voice. No dramatic exit. Just a slow, irreversible shift in the room. His lawyer spoke first, carefully. Then stopped. Then reread the documents like they might change if he stared long enough. My sister sat perfectly still. Hands folded. Eyes fixed on the table. The man beside me didn't rush. He explained everything in order, cleanly, legally, without emotion. How the asset was insulated. How coercion, especially when documented publicly, triggered review. How attempts to force a transfer could be interpreted as financial abuse. My father interrupted twice. Each time, he was gently stopped. This isn't a discussion, the man said calmly. It's a clarification. That word again. When my father finally spoke, his voice was different. Lower. Measured. You're overreacting, he said. This is family. The man nodded. That's why this was avoidable. He slid another document forward. My father stared at it longer than the others. What's this? He asked. A notice, the man replied. Regarding reputational and financial risk, should this matter escalate. My father's jaw tightened. Escalate how? The man didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. My father already knew. The wedding videos had circulated more than he realized. The audio was clear. The context undeniable. Public declaration. Public pressure. Public entitlement. Everything he'd said to control the moment had become evidence. This doesn't leave this room, my father said quietly. The man met his eyes. That depends entirely on you. The room felt smaller after that. My sister finally spoke. This is getting blown out of proportion, she said, voice thin. She didn't even say no. I turned to her then. For the first time since the wedding. You didn't ask, I said calmly. She looked startled, like she'd forgotten I could speak. The man stood. Here's what happens next, he said. You stop pursuing this transfer. You stop contacting her about it. And you acknowledge, privately and publicly, that the asset is hers and always has been. My father scoffed weakly. You can't be serious. I am, the man said. Because the alternative isn't a negotiation. It's a process. Silence. I watched my father calculate. Not emotionally. Practically. He nodded once. Too late. Fine, he said. We'll drop it. The man didn't sit back down. That's not enough. Another document slid forward. A statement, he said. One that corrects the record. My father's eyes flashed. You want me to humiliate myself? No, the man replied. You already did that. This is accountability. The word landed harder than any insult. The statement was simple. No accusations. No drama. Just facts. That the penthouse belonged to me. That any implication otherwise had been incorrect. That there would be no transfer. It would be shared with the same audience that heard the original declaration. My father stared at the paper like it was a verdict. My sister shook her head slowly. You're really doing this? She asked me. After everything? I met her gaze steadily. I didn't do this, I said. I stopped it. The meeting ended shortly after. No hugs. No closure speeches. Just chairs scraping back and a family quietly rearranging itself. The statement went out the next day. It was posted. Shared. Screenshotted. People who'd congratulated me on my generosity messaged again. This time with apologies. This time with questions. My father stopped calling. My sister stopped texting. The penthouse remained exactly where it was. But the real shift wasn't property. It was power. Because once entitlement is exposed to daylight, it doesn't grow back in the dark. And they knew it. They all did. Which made what came next unavoidable. The fallout wasn't loud. It never is, when truth does the work. My father didn't lose everything. He lost something worse, certainty. The kind that lets a person speak into a microphone and assume the world will rearrange itself to agree. Invitations slowed. Conversations changed. People remembered what they'd heard, and more importantly, how they'd heard it. No one confronted him. They didn't have to. Reputation doesn't collapse in a moment. It thins. Quietly. Irreversibly. My sister moved forward with her wedding, but something had shifted between us that never reset. Not anger. Distance. The kind that comes when someone realizes access was mistaken for entitlement. As for me, nothing about my life changed on the surface. I still lived in the same place. Still worked the same hours. Still spoke when it mattered and stayed silent when it didn't. But inside, something settled. For the first time, I understood the difference between patience and permission. Between staying quiet and being powerless. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't threatened anyone. I hadn't taken anything away. I had simply let the truth stand long enough for everyone else to see it. The man who stood up at the wedding never appeared again. He didn't need to. His role was never to rescue me, only to hold the door open while my father walked himself through it. Sometimes people ask if I regret not speaking up sooner. I don't. Because timing matters more than volume. And respect, once lost publicly, can't be reclaimed privately. The penthouse was never the point. It was the assumption behind it. That I would always adjust. That I would always absorb. That silence meant consent. They were wrong. And the thing about being underestimated for so long is this. When you finally stop carrying what was never yours to hold, you don't walk away louder. You walk away lighter. And you don't look back.